Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Sell More Book Show, episode 537. I'm Brian Cohen from Best Page Forward, joined by Matt Dinniman, the author of Dungeon Crawler Carl, and just a really great guy who I love chatting with at every conference I happen to share with. He's had great success. I'm glad you're here, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm glad to be here too, Brian.
Oh, good, good. See, I feel like I have so many people on the show who they're also teacher people, and it's not always getting the deep dive into someone who, nope, mostly just authoring and going out there trying lots of different stuff. And yeah, you've had such great success. I know we'd probably chatted before this, but we happened to be at this speaker dinner before a conference evening where we were both trying to. It ended up we were trying to one up each other with jokes at the end, as I recall. But
Yes, in
but
Seattle, I believe. Yes.
yeah, in Seattle, and we sat next to each other, and yeah, I was just so blown away by honestly, your kindness, your willingness to listen, and you know, you think of these authors who've had big success, and you're like, oh yeah, probably totally full of themselves. But that at least as far as I've seen, wasn't the case with you.
Yeah, well, I try to hide it. I hide it pretty well, you know.
Oh yeah, no, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure. I mean, I feel like I don't even know your if you wanted to give your 60-second story, like where did Dungeon Crawler Carl start, and how did that kind of take off for you?
Sure. Well, you know, I, it's funny you say I'm not a teacher. I'm not. My degree is in education, though. That
Mm-hmm.
was originally my path. I wanted to be a school teacher, and I got all the way through that, and then I decided that just wasn't really what I wanted to do. And so I have kind of like the typical artist's CV. I've jumped from job to job. I worked in the newspaper industry. I worked in child protective services. I worked in corporate advertising for a long time, and none of that
Mm-hmm.
really was really my jam. And then so I just one day I decided to just quit all that. And I was always been a writer, but I wasn't making any money writing, so I started selling artwork. If you, to this day, you can go online and just Google Matt Dinniman art, and you can see all the art I sold. But while I was doing that, I was always just writing books, part time and slowly putting them out there, either via small publishers or self publishing. And then the pandemic happened and kind of forced my hand, because all the art shows stopped, and that's where I was
Yeah.
making most of my money at the time. And I just happened to have Dungeon Crawler Carl was my next project, and it kind of hit the ground running, and it's changed my life. And I was lucky that it resonated so well with audiences, because now it's my full time job. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you came in at the right time with the right genre. Lit RPG got real hot
mhm.
right around that time. Now you probably have a million people trying to copy your exact shtick there over the last few years. But yeah, I mean, what coming from your background, trying so many different things, were you still like tempted at that point? Like, well, better still get another job now that even though there were
Yeah.
successes.
So, when the pandemic first started, the I was that was my income. It was going to art shows, selling art on Amazon, um, and that was working for me. So I always assumed I was just going to go back to that. But it's not really my passion, and writing
Yeah,
has always been my passion. And I was lucky. It was actually one of the subjects we'll be talking about today, I believe. I was lucky that
yeah,
I started a Patreon that has when I first started it, I started it just before the pandemic started, but I didn't actually start advertising it until after the pandemic started because I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
And it went from like one patron to more and more and more. Now I have over 5,000 paid and over 9,000 total on
That's
my
amazing.
Patreon, so that's a full-time
And
job in itself.
you right? I know. We will talk about that. You have that. I know you're doing great on Amazon. You have TradPub stuff with,
Hmm.
with the paperback rights, translations and such too, I
I
imagine.
do have translations in the works.
Yeah.
I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about because it's not out yet, but I have multiple translation fires and coals in the fire right now. So
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing, man. Well, I'm excited for us to dive deeper into things. And yeah, it's going to be a great show. So thank you again for being here. I
uh,
got to do my little ad read here. So here's me doing a little ad read. Are you a six-figure author like Mr. Dinniman here, looking to work less while scaling up? Email me with the subject line work less at brian@sellingforauthors.com to find out about our coaching and done for you Amazon ads agency offerings. So that's work less to brian@sellingforauthors.com. And I guess I better tell my team that they might get an email or two from that. So I'll tell them to look out. Previous week's question, and I'm going to ask you this question, Matt, in a second, but question of a previous week was, have you tried Facebook ads to advertise your books before? What has been your best performing ad platform so far? Deneen Miller said, I use a MailerLite landing page. Do you think that's the same as using your website? Now I'm thinking of switching to BookFunnel. So this is these are responses to our show more than the question. So I'm pivoting here. This was from our episode where we talked about Katie Cross, friend of ours, who tested a BookFunnel landing page versus her regular landing page and found BookFunnel was 3 times better, which was really interesting. And so Deneen is thinking of switching it up. Obviously, it worked for Katie. Richie says one of the interesting, you guys threw me for a loop by answering not the question. So look at me just reading the cue cards. Richie said one of the interesting things Katie found was just by using the dl.bookfunnel.com domain in the ads was shown to more people, thinking the combination plus the design of the landing pages led to the improved results. It's possible. I'm pivoting on my question here, Matt. Are you
okay.
surprised at all that Katie did this test with Facebook ads, ran it to her existing landing page, but then ran it to BookFunnel? So split test. BookFunnel led to more subscribers, I think 3 times as many. Are you surprised by finding that out?
I'm a little surprised, but I think generally people who are more apt to click those sorts of links are more familiar with the BookFunnel platform, and
Mm,
and BookFunnel itself has become such, for those of us, like I'm a reader as much as I am a writer. So for me personally, I feel safer, not necessarily safer, but more confident when I see, oh, they know what BookFunnel is, and I have the BookFunnel app, and I can already know that if I get my books on BookFunnel, especially their audiobook app,
yeah,
then it's going to be quality enough that I can actually know how to read it. A lot of times, I end up on an author's landing page and then they want me to sign up for their mailing list, and then they send me a link to a PDF or something, and I have to jump through extra hoops. And I
yeah.
have that in my head. So no, it doesn't surprise. I mean, 3 times is a lot, but it still, I could see why that would work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the safety issue you bring up is so smart, because it's like, if people recognize, like, oh, I've been on this kind of page before,
Hmm.
they feel safer than if they're at, you know, briancohen.com or
Hmm.
whatever.
Yeah.
So good point. Good point. Y'all, you can answer the question of the week, or I guess whatever you want, at the Sell More Book Show after party. I'll read ahead next time a little bit better. But yeah, let's get into the top story of the week. Cereals just got reamed. Quote, seems like some of us in the author space are forgetting our relationship to our audience, writes Nick Thacker about the latest leadership shuffle in Authorland. Last week, serial fiction platform Ream said goodbye to their long-term CEO, Michael Evans, and that didn't sit well with the author community. There are conflicting stories, so we may never know everything that went on behind the scenes. As author Kevin McLaughlin said, quote, Michael was the trusted face of Ream. Most of us were using Ream because we like and trust Michael, end quote. Ream hasn't shared numbers, but many authors in posts, comments, and blog posts have mentioned the process of moving away from Ream. One of the reasons, after Evans posted a heartfelt goodbye on his personal Facebook profile, the new Ream leadership allegedly stopped by to comment and argue with Evans and other authors, sharing screenshots of private confidential communications with the public. Thacker suggests that readers and companies remember the following, quote, when I launch a course, write a book, coach an author, or speak in front of people, my mantra is remember your relationship with your audience. End quote. Roland, who collects our stories for the show, said, tweak as much as you want. I don't want us to get in trouble, but, this all being stuff that's on public Facebook posts, I guess, if we get in trouble, we get in trouble. But Matt, what had you heard about any of this? I mean, I know you're very active with your Patreon community, so I don't know how much you heard on this
Yeah,
front.
so I'm pretty familiar with Ream. I know all the people involved. Well, I know Michael and I know Amelia Rose, who's
Yeah,
another member of the Ream leadership team. And
yeah,
I met with them at 20 Books conference last year, and I sat down because they showed me some of the things that Ream does and has that Patreon doesn't.
yeah.
And I actually like Ream as a platform. And I told them point blank, I already have such an established Patreon foothold. I'm hesitant to switch to Ream, but if I was just starting, I probably would pick Ream. But I have several author friends who've gone the Ream, and I don't think they have any issues with the platform itself. But when stuff like this happens, it makes people nervous. I know my friend Jez Caggio, who's another lit RPG author, he had a long post on his Patreon about how it doesn't seem like it was working. And it makes people nervous when you see such, I don't know what the right word is, drama coming from the top. Uh,
Yeah.
it it's not a good look. It really isn't, especially when you're trying to woo lots of authors. It's important that we have competition for Patreon, because for a long time it was the only real crowdfunding sort of or serial paid site that you could have with that particular model. I know other places like
Right.
Royal Road, which is traditionally free, is attempting to do something like that as well. But it
Yeah.
looked like it was a good alternative, and maybe in a few years it will, it'll rise from whatever this was and be the true Patreon competitor it wants to be. But for me personally, right now, it feels a little iffy. And
Yeah. Yeah, and I throw the allegedly in there because, I want to protect this show in whatever way we possibly can. I do think that what Nick says, I think, is really important, which
Mhm.
is let's say you do have a company that you have decided you need to let go of the public face. Maybe you had someone who was kind of the person who did the PR, the person who managed the community. You have to keep that in mind. Even if emotions do come into play, even if there are things behind the scenes we don't know, um, there needs to be the thought of protecting the brand. There needs to be the thought of all that. And one of the ways that I personally do it is I am terrified at making anybody upset. And so I bend over backwards to avoid these kinds of things. But I mean, this goes into our first hot potato of wisdom question here, Matt, which I'll
Okay.
ask you. So how have you kept your community image or brand positively focused and on the things that are, important to your own business and your own book's success?
Well, for me, it's pretty important that I have several communities. I have a Discord community, I have a um, Reddit community, and I have
Mm-hmm.
my Patreon community. And all of those are all kind of tied to each other. And one of the big things is I have moderators, we kind of keep it focused on why people are there in the first place, which is the story itself.
Yeah.
Outside drama doesn't really exist, knock on wood, because we avoid it. We don't talk about external factors. I mean, we're all barreling towards an election that's we don't talk about, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Politics, I since the art itself, the story Dungeon Crawler Carl, I mean, it is political in its own way, but it's not about the current political environment, so we kind of keep that out of it, and as a result we keep drama to a minimum. People are there to
Mm,
talk about the book and to have fun and to make jokes and share funny memes and share pictures and talk theories, and we keep that focus tight. And when drama does pop up, and any community that's large enough, there's going to be drama, we shut it down as quickly as possible. And I personally have kind of a moderator team that's between me and the fans, that if something needs to be done, they're the ones that usually move in. And if somebody has to say something, I will say it. And every once in a while, sometimes I'll have to say something, but I'm like you, I try to keep the drama to a minimum.
yeah.
But, let me ask you a question.
Okay, I love it.
Do you have any recommendations for damage control or building community confidence after an incident that's gone poorly? Because, I haven't had that yet,
Mm.
thankfully.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I've had a couple of things happen over the years. This podcast is 10 years old. I was doing stuff even in 2013. So you could say it's been 11 years. And we've had a couple of things. There have been a couple of incidents. I think that the thing, there are certain things that need to be moved quickly on, I feel like. But there are also a lot of things that you have to remember will blow over if it's someone saying something on a blog that doesn't get a lot of traffic, or someone saying something on a comment in a sub comment deep, deep, deep within a post. You don't want to accidentally fan the flames of something that doesn't need to have attention brought to it.
Mhm.
So that's one thing, is remembering that not everything will necessarily catch on fire on its own. So that's part one. Part two is, if something has caught fire, if something has made people frustrated, show your true colors. That's always the best thing you can do. You come out and you show that who you care about, why you do what you do, and even if someone has made you upset or someone has done something that hurts your community, you come out and you pretend that you are leaving them with all of your respect and all of your kindness and all of your everything, even though it's hard. And that is so hard sometimes when you're so upset and the emotions run high. But you need to put out that public image to everybody, and that kindness comes back. It really does come back to you. But it ain't easy, no question. It is definitely not easy to do. Whew.
Uh, yeah, I'm lucky I haven't had to deal with that sort of thing
If you
just
ever
yet.
do, come at
It's
me. I'm
coming.
I'm happy to help. I'm always happy to help. Um, we got our lightning round here. I did forget to mention we need a lightning sound. You might have heard this in the episode. So if you want to throw a lightning sound into the world, we'll take it.
Okay.
Ooh, I liked that. I liked that.
Yeah,
It was short.
I didn't
I
know
might
I was gonna be thrown
I know, that
thrown
was
under the
my
bus
bad for
like
not
that.
mentioning. That was MIDI-esque, so that was good. I feel like we could repeat it 100 times. So, Matt, Dungeon Crawler
Yes.
Carl has kind of taken on a life of its own. At what point did you know it was going to be the thing that changed your life?
Oh man, so it surprised me. The first book came out at the end of 2020, and it had been doing well on Royal Road, a web serial site we had mentioned earlier, but
Yeah.
wasn't like a superstar or anything like that. Came out, was doing pretty good for me, but it wasn't anything insane. And then the audiobook came out right around January or February of 2021. And then one day I logged on and someone said, "Hey, have you listened to this Dungeon Crawler Carl book? Gotten it's pretty funny." And then I looked at my Patreon. Suddenly I woke up and there was suddenly way more people on there. And then it's been kind of a snowball effect. A lot of series, they kind of tend to go down after time, but it's gone up and up and up. And then here we are, fast forward, it's sold 1 million copies of the series so far, and
Oh,
we're just getting started. So,
that's
okay,
amazing.
I got a
Love
question
it.
for you.
I'm ready.
So, some people think big success like my own, they say I got lucky. Do you
Mm.
think there are things authors can do to make success more likely without having to rely on luck?
Yeah, no, I love this question. So, I mean, I wrote it, but uh, so I
We're
think
pretending here, Brian.
I know, it's good pretending. I broke it, so broke the fourth wall. When you are trying to figure out how can I get success, if you still haven't quite found it, I think doing kind of like what you did, Matt, you were learning a lot of things. You were doing the stuff with the art that contributed to everything. You were growing as an author throughout the whole time, looking at getting better. The thing I keep coming to is I keep saying every book you write it 20 to 30% closer to what readers expect. You can get a little bit more to what the market kind of wants, but let's say you have had some success. A
Okay.
lot of authors then try to become well-rounded. Like, oh, I'll get better at this thing. I'll get better at this thing. But you got to look at, you got to be a business. You got to look at your key performance indicators, your KPIs. So if you figure out, man, every time I put out a book, I make 20 grand. Well, then you say, okay, how can I write more words per day so that I can put out a book more regularly so I can get that 20 grand more often? And some people, like, I'll bring up Katie Cross again, who releases a book every month on the same day of the month, which is amazing. But
It's insane.
she looked at the KPIs, she looked at those and said, hey, my best KPI is books per year. So let me go put out more books per year. And it's insane to think about a book per month, but she's doing that for business reasons.
Mhm.
And some people might think she's lucky, but in reality, she is doing the work that she needs to do every day. So I've got a question for you.
Okay.
I was so excited to talk to you about this. Last year,
Mhm.
$376,000 Kickstarter,
Yes.
which was amazing, and I'm sure was bigger than your wildest expectations. Uh, at what point in an author's career does it make sense to do crowdfunding to get the most out of it?
That's kind of it's kind of a hard question for me to answer because even before then, I was like, I don't think I'm ready for a Kickstarter. I have an agent that got me my trad deal, and he's like, no, 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 no. Trust me on this. You need to do a Kickstarter. And he's obviously absolutely right
Right.
because a third of $1 million is a lot of money for a Kickstarter. I think when you have the audience, when you have the product, most Kickstarters, a lot of times, like the whole purpose of Kickstarter in some ways is to give you the money so you can make the product. I personally believe for books, it's kind of important to have the book already written,
Yeah.
unless it's an anthology or like an anthology, and that's a whole different ballgame. But I have the proven track record. I had the fan base that wanted something cool, a special edition. So I knew then that it was time, and I could have probably done it a little bit earlier, um, and still been pretty successful. But it was just kind of a perfect storm of timing. There's Dungeon Crawler Carl was in the news for some other thing at the time. I had book 6 was coming out. The trad deal hadn't happened yet, but we were it was in people's minds. So it came out and it did really well. And now we're gonna keep doing the Kickstarters until we go through the entire series. So I
Yeah.
was pretty happy. But to answer the question is I think Kickstarter, a lot of people are using that first, and I think that that can work. But I don't really have too much experience kickstarting something that's not well known.
Hmm.
So it would be an interesting. I don't know if you've done any shows on that specifically, but that's something I would like to talk more about and read it, because I do personally, like I said before, I'm a reader. I go on Kickstarter just looking for books, looking for comics and cool things to back. I have the
Yeah.
little super backer thing by my name. It's a thing. It's a whole thing, and my credit
Yeah.
card company loves me. But
I'm sure.
but so let me ask you a question. What are some of the hidden challenges of crowdfunding most authors don't realize when they get into it?
I think the biggest challenge of crowdfunding is fulfillment. They just don't think about fulfillment. They don't price high enough for fulfillment, and then they're like, "Crap, what am I
Right.
gonna do?" And I forgot about this myself. The first big successful Kickstarter campaign. I actually did a campaign with my former co-host of the show, Claire, when we did the podcast before the Sell More Books show. So this was years and years ago. But that didn't have much fulfillment. For self-publishing with Amazon Ads book, that had fulfillment. That had paperbacks. That had hardcovers. That had an audiobook. And to your point, something that's already finished, way better,
Hmm.
for sure. Not everybody does that, but also just like farm it out. Get
Yes.
that fulfillment off your plate, because oh, that is my worst nightmare, stuffing things in
Oh man,
envelopes.
I have a really fast story.
Yeah, please.
Before Kickstarter was a thing, when I was selling art, there was another crowdfunding. It was like a daily deals platform,
Yeah.
and they approached me and said, "Hey, can you sell some of your art prints on there?" And I was like, "Sure." I had no idea what it was. I had this little pig art print, and it just said "Om Nom Nom" on it. It was just a little pig thing, and I'm like, "I'll throw it on there, and I'll sell it, like 20 copies, and then I'll send it." And I sold in 1 hour 22,100 copies of this pig art print.
Oh
And
no.
I had no idea what to bleep to do. And that was so you have to. So for our Kickstarter, I said, we need to, what happens if we do $500,000? We need to have pricing, everything had set up ahead of time. Fulfillment is my worst nightmare. So I'm always going to be, you never make that mistake more than twice. But
Yeah.
yeah, so
You'll never say om nom nom again.
no.
All right, last question of the lightning round.
Okay.
Matt, what do you think are the pros and cons of authors starting a Patreon?
Patreon is very good for lots of reasons. Baskets, you don't want all your eggs in the Amazon basket if you can
Mhm.
avoid it. It's super important to diversify your income as much as possible. It's a good way to create a writing community. But one of the more difficult things about the Patreon is it becomes a job. People are paying for access to whatever you're providing. For me personally, it's advanced chapters of the book I'm currently writing. And you have to be consistent about it. It becomes a full-time job. People are paying actual money to have access to whatever it is you're providing. So you need to make sure that they're getting what they paid for, because your reputation is everything, like we were talking about earlier, people, this is ultimately a small community, especially in some of the smaller genres like lit RPG, and don't want to be that guy who promises something that doesn't deliver constantly, because people will talk and it will hurt your career. So you
Mm,
have to be willing to do the work once it comes out. And advertising a Patreon is also that's a whole show on its own. How do you
right.
let people know that you have a Patreon? Because unlike Kickstarter, unlike Amazon, people don't go to Patreon to look for people to back. That's the end result. That's the bottom of the funnel or whatever. It's not the top of it. So
Yeah, we'll have that show another time for sure. For sure. Great answers, Matt. So we need to come up with a question of the week. I always defer to the guest. We don't have to talk about Ream. I feel like we got enough Ream out of our system there. But we could absolutely talk about um, success and luck. We could talk about Kickstarter. We could talk about Patreon. Do you have any questions like you would be interested in hearing from the listeners?
oh man, I didn't know I was going to be thrown on the
I know.
spot like
I'm
that.
like we just talked about random crap before the show when we could have I could have prepared you for things.
No, it's okay. So, question: how do you provide value to your fans beyond the book itself?
Ooh, I like this. I feel like this also
Because
sets us up for next week's episode a little too. I like this. Sorry, I cut you off because
because you have a community, you want people to go to it and they'll talk about your book, but you want to be as evergreen as possible. Your book series will eventually end. All the mysteries, hopefully not, but people stop talking about them. And theoretically, you should be writing a new book. But how do you keep people engaged? I guess, and that's a good
mm,
question.
yeah, I think it's a really good question. I'm going to add that. How do you keep people engaged to the end of that one? So great question, Matt. You thrived on the spot. Folks, you can listen. You can answer the question over at the Sell More Book Show after party or sellmorebookshow.com. Matt, this has been a delight. You're going to be back next week as well. So, where can people find out about you and the Dungeon Crawler Carl series?
You go to mattdinniman.com. It's a new website. I haven't finished putting all the bells and whistles on it. Or you could just Google Dungeon Crawler Carl, and I'm sure something will pop up somewhere.
A good
And
meme or two. Yep.
yeah,
Awesome. No, I love it. Well, I really appreciate you being on the show today. It's it's awesome to hear some of your great stories, and I'm excited to see what comes next for you.
awesome. Thanks for having me.
Of course, folks. Matt will be back next week. For Matt, I'm Brian. Remember, if you are a six-figure author, hit me up with the subject "Work Less" by Brian at sellingforauthors.com. But for Matt, I'm Brian. Have a great week of book selling, everybody. Talk to you next week for episode 538. Bye.
Bye.